assuming we go. And we're going to jump into the agenda. We'll do a quick roll call attendance. And let me pull up the last list that I had from Tish. Okay. Julianne Bride. If you would just acknowledge with a here. Nancy James.
Here.
Melissa McDonough.
Here.
Paula McLaughlin.
Here.
Dan Weller.
Here.
Skip Wells. I saw Skip on the list.
Yeah, Skip's on mute.
Skip, if you could give us a here at one point. I'm going to move on to Maya Plotkin.
He's way to acknowledge. He's just stuck on mute.
Okay. Phil Shapiro. Chris Path.
Here.
Paul Teixeira.
Here.
Chris Coleman.
Here.
Molly Keene.
Here.
Patrick Ahern. Nora Loughnane.
Here.
Todd Korchin.
Here.
Stephanie McManus.
Here.
Jimmy McCarthy.
Here.
I know Lemma and both Tim are out, and Elijah Romulus.
Elijah's actually sick today.
Okay. All right. So on our agenda for today, we've got a few things. Should be a relatively brief meeting. So we're going to go through just the current list of major projects, and then I'd actually like to start with Maya giving an update on something with respect to the schools, and then I'm going to pull up something of a workbook that I'd like us to utilize moving forward. I'll have a discussion with Chris and Stephanie on that, but I think it'll be something that'll help us all stay on the same page. So with that, Maya, would you like to just touch base on some of the things that the school capital planning has been discussing?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. I think I mentioned at the last meeting that we were anticipating a few capital challenges coming forward with the schools. And I think the thing that this group that I wanted to bring to the attention of this group is, I talked about a roof issues that we had at Sheehan, and also potential at the high school. And we've actually figured out within the school how to manage those issues. So really the thing for this group is Thurston. Thurston has a couple issues. It has a roof issue that was identified in the water penetration study that we just had completed. And then it also has some issues with this HVAC. Just as a reminder, I don't know how many of you know this, but just this past year alone, Thurston experienced 4 significant water intrusion issues. And, we managed those repairs, and luckily it wasn't too disruptive to the school day, but the HVAC system is incredibly antiquated and needs a full, not a full replacement, but basically a huge overhaul. It needs a redesign and a sort of a re-scoping and a reinvigorating project for it. So really what we're looking at for Thurston is around $900,000 in the roof, a little bit around $100,000 in short-term capital needs, but then an additional amount for the sort of the longer term for the HVAC. All in, we're probably looking at $3 to $4 million for Thurston. And just as a reminder of the strategy, the strategy for Thurston is to keep it alive and kicking for the next 20 years. It's still structurally sound. It still actually has fairly good bones. And with Sheehan, at the forefront of the school committee's mind, we really need to keep Thurston up and running. So what we would be looking for at some point is a sort of a capital infusion specifically for Thurston, maybe in the round of $4 million that would address the roofing issues and the overhaul of the HVAC. And that's really what I wanted to bring forward to this group today.
Thank you, May. And I will echo that, during budget steering this past year, Lemma actually, when we asked her, what are some of the things that keep you up at night? The HVAC system was one that she highlighted, and it wasn't appearing on a major capital list anywhere. So this is one that, if memory serves, Maya, that they had changed the heating delivery from whether it was forced hot air to hot water or whatever it was, but the conduit is much larger than what the need is, and that actually puts stress on the system. So that's my recollection. So with that, as we start to look at the various projects, what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen, and is everybody seeing what I've got here?
Yep.
All right. I think this will be something that could be very helpful for everybody. What I've done is created just a summary that has the list, and then each project itself. What I'd like to have done, and let me blow this up so people can see it, is I'd like to have the name of the project, what the description of the need is in some level of detail, what an estimated time frame for that need is, whether or not it's got regulatory requirements and a time frame for compliance associated with it. And then importantly, are there potential outside grants or funding sources that could get us to some type of net bond amount of what we would need to raise in some type of exempt debt? So first, this is a pure draft. You can see there are numbers that I just grabbed from our long-term or our 5-year capital plan book. But this is I didn't put in everything, knowing that, at some point 20 years down the line, it's going to be impossible to predict what that cost is right now. But, as Maya just alluded to, Thurston may be something that needs to be revisited 20 years from now. To me, that's within the purview of long-term planning, because we're going to have a lot of other things that will need to be funded and roll off in order to properly have this be a continuous rolling discussion. So first of all, can I get some feedback as to whether people think this would be helpful? Let me start with Chris. You may be on.
So Rob, I do think this is going to be helpful. I think one of the challenges is, so for example, just using comparing the fire station FH1 to town hall.
Yep.
We have a professional providing us with a feasibility study on that.
Mhm.
We have not done something to that level for town hall. I can't speak for the schools. I know that from a DPW has been in town hall, has been on the 5-year capital plan ever since I got here. So well before me.
Mhm.
But we kept on pushing it out. So I think we would certainly I think it would be wise for us to have some type of professional come in and just make sure that we have a scope of what we're looking to have done, to make sure we have the proper dollar amounts from an estimate. But I do think this makes sense as a great starting point.
Yeah, and then, what I'd like to be able to do is have the responsible proponent or department head or whomever come in, and in subsequent meetings, maybe we knock off 2 per meeting where we get more details, right? With everything from photos to sort of narrative, there's a lot behind why all these things are on the list. And so, and there are some presumptions too, right? There's a rec center listed here that I think is listed contemplating the repurposing of a Deerfield school. Well, that, certainly makes it shorter money if that were the case, but that doesn't necessarily, it's not guaranteed that way either, right? So I think there are just some things that we need to be mindful of as a group when we're talking about this, to understand what the assumptions are behind some of these things. Julie, I see you have a question.
Quick question, and I'm still chugging through the comprehensive plan, so I apologize if this is laid out. But has the town done kind of any planning around the 109 side and kind of look and feel as part of, like, Islington looks phenomenal now, and I hear people time and time again saying, well, what are we going to do with 109? So as we think about some of these key structures on 109, how does that impact or help advance kind of contemporizing or making the center of Westwood on 109 more useful to residents? Do we have any plan around that? Or are we just taking these kind of building by building?
Well, you're highlighting a couple of things. One is, we have a need for continued commercial growth, right? In order to be able to maintain our split tax rate and revitalize the 109 business area. There is not a formal plan in place, and I'll let Nora maybe touch on this, because there is private ownership of many of the centers that we're talking about. Nora, would you care to elaborate?
Sure. So we did the same thing in Washington Street in Islington Center as we did in High Street. We started by rezoning the properties to give the property owners incentives for improving the properties. In the case of Washington Street, we were fortunate that we had a long-term owner who was ready to sell. And so we could get in some new capital, new ownership, and make some projects happen there. We don't have that yet on High Street. So we have 3 properties that are ripe for redevelopment and that are all owned by entities that are not interested in either improving them or selling them right now. Hopefully that will change in the future, but in the meantime, we're doing what we can to put the zoning in place. At the last town meeting, we rezoned the property where Westwood Pizza and Dunkin' Donuts is to make that eligible for mixed use development. So that was our latest change, but the other properties along High Street have been under mixed use development zoning for probably about 8 years now. So.
And
so we'll
remind me, Nora, what does that do for the commercial owners, the mixed use? It gives them a chance to.
It gives them an opportunity to go to the planning board with a project that doesn't necessarily meet the standard setback requirements of the local business district, doesn't necessarily meet the height requirements, the parking requirements. They have flexibility to show that whatever they would like to do would work there, and then the planning board has flexibility to approve it. It also allows for upper story residential development, which is not allowed by the underlying zoning.
Okay, thank you. I just think that that's something, as you hear people talk about, and we're looking at taxes and all of these very important projects, I do think anything that can contribute towards or be positioned towards advancing the 109 side look and feel, I think would be received well. I don't know if others kind of hear the same or feel the same. And it's really because of the success of the Islington side. So good job, Nora.
I would echo that, Julie, in that, to date, what we've talked about is the expense side of the ledger as part of this group. But, if we're really going to be thinking from a long range standpoint, we do need to be talking about the revenue side. And I wouldn't limit it just to the 109 area. There may be things on Route 1 and other areas that could be, if there was the right, ownership to consolidate, to maybe reimagine and revitalize and provide an infusion. So Todd, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, Rob, I think this is a great start. I'd also like to see possibly a column for those specific buildings that don't have a current or up-to-date feasibility study associated with it, because that's going to be a capital investment as well. So maybe like for example, for DPW, ours was done almost 8 or 9, maybe even 10 years ago by Weston and Sampson. Weston and Sampson is a very credible, DPW known architect, engineer, design firm who we would most likely end up using at some point in time. But to have them come in here and really assess things from the previous study up until now, a lot's evolved, especially with our equipment just what we've taken on recently, what we're gonna need for expansion purposes, and then obviously just the evolution in a very bad way of our staff quarters right now. It's
Mhm.
deteriorated that much more since the last study. So possibly a column before, or maybe like you have the estimated amount, but then maybe like feasibility study estimated amount, and then work our way down left to right type of concept.
Great suggestion. Is there anybody else just by raising hand? Maya, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, just sort of building on what Todd said, I think what you could do with that column is just say where the estimated amount came from, right? Whether it's a feasibility study, back of the envelope estimate. I think that would put it in context for us. Like I know the fire station is a feasibility study. Sheehan School, we have actual numbers from Doran Whittier, you know,
I think I can add both of those columns. I think that's a great
Yeah.
suggestion. Yep. Skip, I see you have your hand up.
Just to echo what Julie said, the last time I was on the Long Range Planning Committee was in the early 80s. And our number one recommendation was addressing the problems and the aesthetics of High Street. So if we, and it can do that in any way, I think that's the town's major weakness at this point.
Thank you, sir. Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One, or comments, I guess, is looking at, you know, on these lists, do we have anything like start dates that we like, are there, or any kind of prioritizations on these projects?
So this becomes the foundation for that, right? So that's why I say, you know, as you look at the individual sheets and what I would anticipate being the foundation for a presentation by a department head or the sort of major proponent of a project is, you know, what is the estimated time frame
Sure.
of the need? Now, the estimated time frame of the need is not a guaranteed commitment of this is when this is going to get done, because that's the purpose of this group, is to be able to help look at and then help prioritize based on the need, the availability of funds as we look at existing capital projects and when things are rolling off, to be able to mitigate the tax impact, but still get as much of this stuff done in as timely a fashion as possible. So I would say this becomes the foundation for the discussions. And then at our last meeting, I believe it was Julie who asked, will we have some type of, you know, scoring or rubric that we would use to be able to then help prioritize? Yes, but I think let's first get this information in our hands and hear from the various department heads as to why the need is and what the urgency of that is.
Great.
So I think it's a good question, and
Yeah.
it's a next step from here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And my other comment is, so for the development of 109, can we consider, you know, the Deerfield School as part of our 109 development? I mean, we got a lot of space there, and that might be something that we should maybe explore versus, you know, just using it for rec department or whatever that consideration is. I don't know.
I think, you know, first and foremost, that's still under the care, custody, and control of the schools, and they would need to turn that over back to the select board. And then we would have to make some determinations on what the possible options for use might be. But it's a fair question and an understandable one.
Thank you.
Chris, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. Just to make sure I clarify everything with this board, this committee, this advisory group, as well as with public who's watching. As far as Station 1, we are in the process of a feasibility study. It has not been completed. There will be an update to the select board at their meeting tomorrow night, but it will still not be completed. So that number is a placeholder. That is not the result of a feasibility study.
Right, and that's why I think the suggestions of both the column of where that number comes from and what the cost of a feasibility study are from both Todd and Maya are excellent additions to this. Anything else, Chris? No. Okay, Nancy, I see you have your hand up.
I do. Do we have an average cost of a feasibility study? Is that known, or does it, obviously it varies based on the project.
I can't say that I have a number off the top of my head. Chris or Stephanie, might you?
It does vary by project. So for example, I think the fire station, we're estimating, I think we're, Stephanie, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 72 or 65, something like that, but we're also doing. a feasibility-
72.
So, thank you. And we're also doing a feasibility for our radio infrastructure. So again, that just varies depending on the type of either building or service or facility that you're looking to have studied.
Nancy, I can also say too, it really depends on how deep into the weeds you want to get and how much you want to say parlay what the feasibility study consists of and parlay that into the actual design or the early stages of the design once you get going on the project. Because there are steps you can take during the feasibility study to check some boxes off of early design phase, like necessities per se. So it could be as simple as, let's look at this very broad $10,000 type of study, or let's like make a little more of an investment, perhaps 25,000, but it does check off some early stages such as survey or necessary boxes that need to be checked off during the formal design.
Thanks. And that's obviously a case by case.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I think with that, I'm going to move on to our next agenda item, which is reports from the working group that was talking about the Community Preservation Act. I had Nancy Hyde shared that working group, and she is unable to be here this morning, but I believe, Chris, you can probably provide some synopsis of that meeting.
Sure, thank you. And on behalf of the subcommittee, those members are Nancy Hyde, Julianne Bride, Skip Wells, Melissa, Stephanie, and myself. We all attended the meeting on Wednesday, June 28th. We talked about a number of different things, but just as a little summary of the work, we really focused on CPA and having an anchor project and seeing if Hale could be used as an anchor project. The subcommittee did not get into the detail, the merits of the Hale proposal, just talking about it in connection with the CPA. And so we looked at a variety of things. We looked at the comprehensive report, and just for those who are interested, the CPA information begins on page 217. And we talked about a number of different things as far as steps. I shared with the subcommittee or the working group, excuse me, that we did meet with the CPA Coalition. We did walk through, which is a nonprofit organization that helps communities who are contemplating CPA and also helps get funding from the Commonwealth for communities who do have CPA. And we walked through a number of proposals. And what we came up with is the timing for a CPA approval. We would have to go to town meeting first, then an election. And so, and I'm gonna confirm that with them one more time, but that's the steps that we would have to go with. After we have the election, then we form a committee. We also begin the surcharge on the real estate taxes. And then at a subsequent town meeting, the committee would make a recommendation to town meeting with town meeting support, then those projects would be funded. The way the timing works for Hale right now being the anchor project, that doesn't work well. Doesn't work at all, actually. We would have to, because you can't approve a project and then approve CPA and then have CPA fund a prior approval. CPA can only be, projects from CPA can only be funded through town meeting, through the recommendation from the committee to town meeting in support of town meeting. There are some other potential uses that the working group did talk about regarding CPA funds and some of the benefits that it would provide the town, but also looking at some of the projects that we just discussed and some of the timing of that, similar to what the long-range financial planning committee did back in 2019 when the community had some large debt coming up, whether or not the timing of CPA was going to be, if it was the right time at that point. That's what the committee is still, or the task force is still talking about. And Nancy and Stephanie are going to be working on some things going forward. So we should have an update at one of our future meetings, or another update at one of our future meetings. And if there's anyone who on that working group that if I didn't say something that you recall, or if I said something correctly, please share it with the group.
I just would add that for one of the things that we talked about is what percentage, if we're doing a surcharge, what that would look like. and that it would be the highest, Chris, I believe you said the highest we've seen is 1.5% surcharge has been, but usually it's like would be around 1.5%. And Skip did the math, which was, thank you, Skip. We were looking at it'd be about $200 perhaps a household, or it wouldn't, it's so we think surcharge, we think a lot more than it might be, but there are limited purposes for the funds. But then we do get, if it's what is it, Chris? It's like open spaces, historical
Recreation, affordable
preservation.
housing. Yes.
Yep, affordable housing. And so we would have these different categories, and then what it also allows us to do is get some match from the state. But because it doesn't line up with HALE, the thing that we were talking about would be, well, that would be asking the town to consider CPA on top of HALE perhaps. So.
And Melissa, thank you for that. And just for the other members who may not be familiar with CPA, the surcharge is up to 3%. What the CPA Coalition has found, other communities that have done and been successful getting it approved, it's between 1 and 1.5% surcharge that those communities have brought forth to their authorization body, whether it's city council or town meeting. And that's what they would recommend for us to consider. When the town previously brought something before town meeting for a vote, it did get voted at town meeting, but it failed at the ballot. At that time, the town was considering a 3% surcharge. So our working group was talking about if the town was going to go forward with this, we're looking at what other communities have done, which is between 1 and 1.5%.
Thank you, Chris and Melissa. I had Chris, just a one follow-up question that maybe could be incorporated into the next report from the working group. Of those towns that have passed, do you know, is there any way to determine whether or not they had anchor projects lined up, you know, in the appropriate sequencing that you just laid out, that helped get that passed, at least in the narrative? I'm sure that won't exist in the way that anything that was voted on will, you know, won't be easy to research, but I'm just curious as to, you know, what that might look like.
I can speak, we can certainly look into that. I can speak of one community that I'm very familiar with. They did have an anchor project. The town of Needham had an anchor project, which was Town Hall. And that's what was presented to town meeting. But they had CPA before the Town Hall project began, and they did other projects prior to the town, prior to the renovation of Town Hall. And the renovation of Town Hall at the time was a $19 million historical reservation project, which at the time was the highest amount for CPA funds used for historical preservation.
Got it. Paul McLaughlin, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm glad that this committee is considering CPA. I think I kind of, over the years, I think CPA was started in 2000. And over the years in Westwood, I've heard this come up over and over again. Oh, I wish we had done the CPA project. I wish that had passed. So seeing that you're really looking at it, I know, yeah, I think it's about more than half of the cities and towns in the Commonwealth have adopted it. I wouldn't be discouraged to not do it if it doesn't align with the HALE project, only because, as history has shown us, there'll be something else where we're going to say, oh, I wish we had the CPA project. So I'm just glad that that there's a committee thinking about it. And it would have been great if we had done it before HALE, but there'll be something else that comes up in the future, I'm sure.
Thank you. Maya.
I just had a quick question about the timing. So it would go to town meeting and then an election. So did the committee discuss doing a special election for the CPA, or would it just run through the normal cycle? Whereas if you went to a spring town meeting or even a fall town meeting, then you'd go to the next election for it, and then you'd go back to it. I'm just trying to figure out how long, given this process, it's going to take to implement the CPA.
It's a fair question. I'll let Chris respond to that.
Man, that's a great question. And we did talk about that, and actually speaking with the CPA Coalition, one of the things that they suggested is they've seen the greatest amount of success during a presidential ballot. So they would recommend tying it to the presidential ballot.
I see.
In
So
November.
so November 2020, so this
24.
November. No, next November,
24.
November 2024.
24, yeah.
So we go to we would, if this was going to be presented at the annual town meeting as an example,
Mhm.
and successful, then the ballot would be the presidential ballot.
Okay.
Paula, do you have a follow-up question? I see your
No,
hand.
sorry, I just forgot to unraise my hands.
That's all right.
And then, sorry, just following that through, then we'd form the committee and then the committee would make its recommendation at town meeting, and that would be town meeting of 2025
At the earliest.
At the
Yes.
earliest.
at the
Yes.
earliest.
Yes.
And Chris, relevant to that timeline, one of the things that we also talked about, and if you could help me fill in the details, is we were asking, we weren't discussing the substance of everything with Hale, but we wanted to understand the timeline in terms of how it would fit in with the CPA. And so my understanding, there's not like a hard timeline, but basically I think Hale's been looking at this for a while. So that's why we feel like it's going to be too late. Is that accurate, Chris? In terms of the Hale timeline?
I would say it's accurate based on the timeline that we've been discussing with Hale thus far. Melissa, you're 100% correct. If that timeline were to change and it worked, because let's not forget, we also, Hale is not just Westwood, Hale is Westwood and Dover. So both communities would look to approach something at the same time or around the same time. So if the whole discussion could be pushed after, then Hale could be an anchor project, but given the current timeline, it doesn't work with the town considering CPA at this point.
And just to be clear, that's when you say the current timeline, you mean the current desired timeline by Hale.
Correct, yes.
Yep, okay. Okay. So thank you for that update, and my apologies to the other working group that I had a little crisis that morning as I was driving in, so I was unable to hold that meeting. So I think the next item on the agenda is to look to schedule future meetings. So with that, I know it's sort of busy summer vacation time, but let's see if we can't get something on the calendar for mid-August, or the last couple of weeks of August, to reconvene this group in total, and then we'll talk about next steps and potential dates for the working groups. Does that make sense?
We do have our schedule, Rob, our subcommittee that Chris just referred to as meeting, I think. in
July
2
25th.
Yeah, we set that up on our last call. So we
Excellent.
do have that subcommittee meeting set up.
Okay. Well, why don't we try to get something on the schedule for, and I believe one of our members has a conflict with these Tuesday morning meetings, but we'll have to, right now it's working for the majority, so I don't want to try to rejigger it for this many people. Can we look to Tish, as we look out, today's the 11th, if we were to say shoot for either the 15th or the 22nd of August, how does that work for folks?
22nd's better for me, but I could make the 15th work.
Okay.
15th, it does not work for me.
Okay, Skip.
The
I can do the
22nd
20
doesn't work for me, but it sounds like it works for everybody else.
I can do the 22nd and could also make the 15th work.
Okay,
Rob, I could do the 22nd. I couldn't do the 15th.
thank you, Todd.
I can do either.
All right.
Same for me.
Well,
No preference.
sounds like we're coalescing around the 22nd for this group. And then for those that are on the sort of facilities discussion group, how does the morning of the 27th of July, well, actually, no. How about the morning of August 1. That's a Tuesday.
I'm out of town from July 27th through August 5th.
Okay. Let's see. And Julie, if I heard you right, you just said 25th is when you have yours scheduled for?
Yes,
July, yes.
yes, July 20th.
And so Tish, we can't accommodate both at the same time, right? Or can
An
we?
internal meeting, so we could.
Could
you
we
all
make,
do it at the same day?
could the 25th work for the facilities group?
I think May is away, is Maya.
No, I'm
Should
leaving
be
on the
27th.
27th. I could do
Oh,
the
27th.
25th. I just can't do it until around
8:30?
9
Oh, really?
because I have a camp duty that morning, drop off duty that morning.
Well, let's see what we get from everybody else.
Priorities first, right?
Checking my camp drop off as well. And I'm sorry, which day? The
Tuesday, the 25th.
25th? I believe I can, let me just check my calendar. I am fine with that.
Okay,
I'm good, Rob.
excellent. And let's, Tish, let's schedule that.
For the
Um,
25th
Yep,
at 9.
at 9. Yep,
Thank you.
excellent. All right. I believe that concludes the agenda that we had for our meeting. Any questions? I see something in the Q&A.
Yes, there is a question from Kathy Sullivan, 283 Farm Lane.
Says, can you elaborate on how the school department figured out how to manage the Sheehan roof and high school roof funding?
Yeah, so we're still working through that. We have reserve funds that we intend to use. And we also typically look for capital articles. So between those two sources, that's how we're going to manage that funding.
Right, you continue, in the past, you have built up reserves for roofing because you know that it's an expensive proposition, so that's
Correct.
typically how you guys have managed that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, well, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, do I get a second?
Second.
Okay, Chris, do I need to do a roll call vote to adjourn?
You do.
Unfortunately, you do.
I do. Okay. Here you are, Pat. All right. So let's
Before you do that, there's another Q&A, Mr.
Oh.
Chairman.
thank you very much. As two. Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane, in regards to Hale, has the select board ever considered acres from Hale added to the MBTA zoning? I'm going to let Chris answer that, as I have recused myself from any discussions with respect to him.
Yes, so I'm actually going to ask Nora to answer that one, but I think there's some factors with that, but I'll add on to what Nora will say to this in response.
Yeah, we've considered all parcels all throughout town and are still considering them. But the particular concern about any parcels that are currently part of Hale is the traffic access to those parcels. They have frontage on very limited streets. It would be difficult to handle the traffic associated with any additional residential development, but it's a possibility for further study.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Julianne Bryant,
I am in favor.
Nancy James,
Aye.
Melissa McDonough,
Aye.
Paul McLaughlin,
Aye.
Dan Weller.
He stepped off.
Okay, Skip Wells,
Aye.
Maya Platkin,
Yep, yes.
Chris Path,
Aye.
and Paul Tesseri.
Yes.
And I vote aye as well. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. And we will see everybody later in August and at your working group meetings. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye all.
Thanks, everyone.